Before we begin, let me ask you to do something simple that helps stories like this reach the people who truly need them. If you're someone who finds meaning in quiet emotional moments, the kind that don't arrive with shouting or chaos, but instead unfold slowly in silence, then take a moment to subscribe to the channel. This space is for people who understand that the most important turning points in life rarely arrive like thunderstorms. They don't crash through the door all at once. Most of the time, they begin with something smaller. A conversation that lingers a little longer than expected. A glance that lasts 1 second too long. A pause in the middle of a sentence that suddenly feels heavier than it should. Or sometimes a door that isn't fully closed. Not completely open. Just slightly ajar. Just enough to let something unexpected slip through. And tonight's story begins exactly there. With a door left slightly open. And a moment that quietly changed everything. I never woke up one morning thinking that my life needed to change. There wasn't a dramatic collapse. No screaming arguments echoing through the house. No shattered dishes against the kitchen wall. No tearful ultimatums or nights spent sleeping on opposite sides of the bed. From the outside, my life looked stable, respectable, organized. The kind of life people imagine when they talk about someone who has everything together. We lived in a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood where the streets were always clean, and the lawns were trimmed with almost mathematical precision. My husband Marcus was successful in the way people admire from a distance. Confident. Driven. The kind of man who always seemed to know where he was going next. Our life together looked good in photographs. Vacations by the ocean. Holiday dinners with smiling relatives. Celebrations that seemed warm and complete. But photographs are strange things. They capture the surface of a moment while hiding everything underneath. And underneath that life, something inside me had slowly grown quiet. Not unhappy exactly, but muted. Like a piano that had gradually drifted out of tune. You could still play the music. The melody was technically there. But something about the sound felt slightly wrong. Slightly hollow. The strange thing about emotional silence is that it rarely arrives all at once. It comes quietly, patiently. A little less laughter during dinner. A little less curiosity about each other's day. Conversations becoming shorter. Eye contact fading a few seconds earlier than it used to. Until one day you realize that the quiet around you isn't peaceful anymore. It's just empty. But at the time I didn't think of it that way. I simply assumed this was what adulthood looked like. Stable. Predictable. Comfortable. Normal. That Tuesday night began like any other. Nothing dramatic. Nothing memorable. The house was dark and still, wrapped in the kind of silence that settles over a place long after midnight. It was the deep kind of quiet where even the walls seemed to be sleeping. I woke up because I was thirsty. That was all. Just a small, forgettable reason to leave the bed. I slipped my feet onto the cool wooden floor and walked slowly into the hallway. The air felt heavy with that late-night calm that exists only when everyone else in the world seems to be asleep. Even the smallest movement felt amplified. The faint creak of the floor beneath my feet sounded louder than usual. The soft rustle of my clothing felt strangely noticeable in the stillness. Halfway down the hallway, something caught my attention. Light. A thin, narrow line of warm golden light stretching across the floorboards. It sliced through the darkness like a quiet blade. For a moment I simply stood there, staring at it. The light was coming from a door that wasn't completely closed. Julian's door. Julian had been living with us for several months. He was Marcus's younger cousin, 24 years old. A musician. Sensitive in the way artists often are before the world teaches them how to hide it. He had come to stay temporarily while working on a musical composition he hoped would launch his career. At least that had been the plan. Marcus liked helping family members when he could. It made him feel generous, important, capable. So Julian moved into our guest suite and slowly became part of the background rhythm of the house. We didn't interact much. A polite greeting in the mornings. An occasional conversation in the kitchen. Sometimes we sat in the same room while Marcus enthusiastically talked about work, travel, or whatever new project currently had his attention. Julian usually listened quietly, observing more than speaking. He existed in the house the way background music exists in a cafe. Always present. Rarely the center of attention. That night, Marcus wasn't home. He traveled often for conferences and business events. Airports seemed to energize him. Hotels excited him. Long dinners filled with loud laughter and networking conversations were his natural environment. I stayed home. And when Marcus traveled, the house felt strangely hollow. Two people can share a home and still live in completely separate emotional spaces. Add physical distance to that, and the silence grows larger. That week, Julian was the only other person in the house. And now, standing there in the dark hallway, I could see the thin line of light beneath his door. It wasn't fully closed. It wasn't open either. Just slightly ajar. I don't know why I slowed down as I approached it. I don't know why my heartbeat changed. But something about that moment felt strangely charged. Have you ever experienced something like that? A moment that should mean absolutely nothing suddenly feels important. When curiosity stops feeling casual and starts feeling magnetic, like something inside you is quietly pulling you forward. That's the strange thing about life's turning points. Most of them don't announce themselves. They whisper. I reached the door and paused. Part of me thought I should knock. Another part of me knew I wasn't really checking on him. I was curious. Maybe even concerned. But if I'm being completely honest, there was something else there too. Something quieter. Something I didn't fully understand yet. So instead of knocking, I glanced through the narrow opening. And that's when I saw him. Julian was sitting on the floor beside the bed. His back leaned against the mattress. His shoulders slightly slumped forward. A laptop rested open in front of him. The pale blue glow of the screen illuminated his face and cast faint shadows across the room. But it wasn't the laptop that held my attention. It was his expression. There's a certain look people have when they believe they are completely alone. A look they would never show if someone else were in the room. Their posture softens. Their emotional defenses disappear. The mask they wear for the world quietly falls away. Julian had that expression. Not dramatic grief. Not loud crying. Just something raw. Something unguarded. Something quietly broken. His eyes were fixed on the laptop screen, but he wasn't really watching it. He looked like someone carrying more weight than he knew how to hold. Then his shoulders began to tremble. Slowly at first. Then more noticeably. He covered his face with his hands. And that's when I realized he was crying. Not the kind of crying people perform in front of others. This was different. Quiet. Contained. The kind of crying that escapes when someone believes absolutely no one is watching. The kind that carries years of pressure in a single silent moment. And then something else caught my attention. In the mirror on the wardrobe door, I could see the reflection of his laptop screen. A video was playing. Julian appeared younger in the clip. He was laughing beside someone I didn't recognize. They were outside somewhere bright and sunny. The camera shook slightly as whoever was filming laughed along with them. It was a simple moment. Just happiness captured in pixels. But Julian wasn't smiling as he watched it. He looked like someone staring through a window into a life he could no longer reach. I hadn't meant to see any of that. But once you witness someone's pain like that, you can't pretend you didn't. And in that moment, something invisible shifted between us. Something fragile. Something real. Maybe it was the sound of my breathing. Maybe it was a small movement in the hallway. Or maybe some instinct warned him he wasn't alone anymore. Whatever the reason, Julian suddenly turned his head toward the door. Our eyes met through the narrow gap. Shock flashed across his face. Then embarrassment. Then panic. He quickly snapped the laptop shut. Too late. Some things cannot be unseen. I didn't hear you, he said quietly. His voice sounded thick, like the words had to push through something heavy. For a second I didn't know what to say. I should have apologized. I should have explained that I was just walking to the kitchen. I should have stepped away immediately and given him his privacy. But instead, I just stood there. Because something about that moment felt strangely significant. Two people had accidentally stepped behind each other's emotional masks. Neither of us had planned it. Neither of us expected it. But suddenly we had seen something real inside each other. And once that happens, it's impossible to pretend things are the same. That was the moment everything quietly began to change. For the next few days after that night, something subtle shifted inside the house. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no confrontations. No uncomfortable conversations about what I had seen. But silence between two people can change shape once something real has been exposed. Before that night, the quiet between Julian and me had been neutral. Now it felt alive. The first morning after it happened, I saw him in the kitchen. Sunlight spilled through the large windows, filling the room with a soft golden glow. The smell of coffee hung in the air. Julian stood near the counter pouring cereal into a bowl. For a moment he didn't notice me. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from staying up too late, but the deeper kind. The kind that lives behind someone's eyes. When he finally looked up, we both froze slightly. Just a second, but long enough to acknowledge that something had changed. "Morning," he said. His voice sounded normal, carefully neutral. "Morning," I replied. And that was it. 2 simple words. But behind them lingered everything we hadn't said. We moved around the kitchen politely, almost cautiously, like 2 people learning the layout of a new room. That quiet tension followed us through the next few days. Sometimes I would hear faint music drifting from Julian's room late at night. Soft piano notes. Fragments of melodies repeating over and over. Other times I would see him sitting outside in the backyard with headphones on, staring into the distance like someone searching for a thought that wouldn't quite arrive. We still didn't talk much. But awareness had replaced indifference. And awareness can be a powerful thing. A few days later Marcus returned from his conference. He walked through the front door carrying his usual storm of energy. Marcus had always been the kind of person who filled a room the moment he entered it. His voice was loud. His laughter even louder. Within minutes he was talking excitedly about presentations, new business contacts, and potential opportunities. To him, the world was a series of doors waiting to be opened. And he loved telling the story of each one. That evening we sat around the dinner table together. Marcus talked almost non-stop. Julian mostly listened, nodding occasionally. I noticed something then. Every so often, Julian would glance at me. Not in a romantic way. Not even intentionally. Just brief looks that seemed to ask a quiet question. Did you really see what happened that night? And if you did, what does it mean now? Marcus, of course, noticed nothing. He was too busy describing a conversation he had with a potential investor over steak and expensive wine. The strange thing about long relationships is that sometimes 2 people can stop noticing each other's silence. Marcus and I had become efficient partners in life. We ran a household together. We attended events together. We made plans for the future. But somewhere along the way, we had stopped asking deeper questions. And sitting there at the dinner table, watching Julian quietly push food around his plate, I felt something uncomfortable. Not attraction. Not yet. But recognition. The kind that happens when you suddenly see a piece of yourself in someone else. A week later everything changed again. It was late evening. Marcus had gone to bed early because he had an early flight the next morning. I was sitting in the living room reading when I heard the soft sound of piano music. Not recorded music. Real piano. Julian was playing in the guest room. We didn't actually have a full piano in the house, just a digital keyboard he had brought with him. But in the quiet house, the sound carried beautifully. The melody was slow, gentle, sad in a way that felt honest rather than dramatic. I set my book down and listened. For a long time I stayed where I was. But eventually curiosity pulled me toward the hallway again. The same hallway. The same door. This time it wasn't closed. It was open. Julian sat at the keyboard, his back toward me. His fingers moved slowly across the keys, repeating a pattern over and over as if trying to shape something fragile. When he noticed me standing there, he stopped playing. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "Sorry. Did I wake someone?" "No," I said. "It's beautiful." He looked surprised. "Really?" "Yes." He hesitated for a moment, then turned slightly on the bench. "I'm still working on it," he said. "It's not finished yet." "What is it about?" I asked. He stared down at the keyboard for a long time before answering. "Letting go of a life you thought you'd have." There was no drama in his voice, just honesty. After a pause he added softly, "The video you saw, that was my ex." I didn't interrupt. Sometimes people speak more freely when you don't rush to respond. We were together for 4 years, he continued. I thought we were building something real. He laughed quietly. But sometimes you only realize a relationship is over after the other person has already left emotionally. His words hung in the air. And unexpectedly, they echoed something deep inside me. For the first time in a long while, I said something completely honest too. Sometimes you don't notice that happening until years later. Julian looked up at me then. Really looked. Not politely. Not casually. But with recognition. We didn't say anything else for a while. He turned back to the keyboard and played the melody again. And I stood there listening. Over the next few weeks, small conversations began to happen. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing secret. Just moments. We talked about music. About creativity. About how strange adulthood can be when the life you imagine slowly becomes something else. One evening Marcus joked during dinner. You two have become philosophers lately. He laughed as he said it. But something about that comment made me realize something important. Marcus hadn't noticed that Julian and I were simply talking. Because Marcus and I had stopped having those kinds of conversations years ago. The turning point arrived quietly. One afternoon Julian knocked on the living room door. I finished the piece, he said. Do you want to hear it? I followed him to the guest room. He sat at the keyboard and began to play. The melody was fuller now. Stronger. Still sad, but also hopeful in a strange way. As the final notes faded, the room fell silent. That's beautiful, I said softly. Julian looked at me for a moment. Then he said something unexpected. You know, I think you're lonely. The words weren't cruel. They were gentle. But they landed with surprising force. I didn't immediately deny it. Because deep down I knew he was right. After a long pause I said quietly, maybe. He nodded slowly. I think Marcus doesn't see it. He's busy, I said automatically. Julian smiled sadly. Busy is sometimes another word for absent. That sentence stayed with me long after I left the room. A few days later Julian told us he had been offered an opportunity. A small music studio in another city wanted him to collaborate on a project. It meant moving out. Marcus congratulated him enthusiastically. That's fantastic, he said. You'll finally get your career moving. Julian thanked him. But later that evening, he found me alone in the kitchen. I'm leaving next week, he said. I heard. There was a strange quiet between us. Not uncomfortable. Just full. I'm glad you walked down that hallway that night, he said. I looked at him surprised. Why? Because it reminded me I wasn't completely invisible. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he added gently. And I think it reminded you of something too. I knew exactly what he meant. Julian moved out the following Saturday morning. Marcus helped him load boxes into his car. They shook hands, hugged, and wished each other luck. Then Julian drove away. The house felt different after that. Quieter. But not the same kind of quiet as before. Because once you become aware of something inside yourself, you can't go back to ignoring it. That evening Marcus sat on the couch scrolling through emails. Without looking up he said, "The house feels empty again." "Yes," I said softly. And then after a moment, I asked something we hadn't discussed in years. "Marcus, when was the last time we talked about what we actually want from our lives?" He looked up at me surprised. For the first time in a long while a real conversation began. Not an easy one. Not a quick one. But a real one. Sometimes the most important people in our lives don't stay forever. Sometimes they simply pass through. Like a door left slightly open for just a moment. Long enough to let a little light inside. Julian didn't change my life by becoming part of it. He changed it by reminding me that it was still possible to wake up emotionally. And sometimes that's all it takes. Just a small moment. A quiet hallway. A door not fully closed. And the courage to finally ask yourself whether the life you're living is the one you truly want. If this story made you reflect on the quiet moments that shape our lives, don't forget to subscribe for more real and emotional stories. And remember, sometimes the smallest moments are the ones that change everything.